Well, I'm continuing my sermon series this morning on tough-minded Jesus. And a few of you have slipped in since the welcoming, so we're glad that you're here. We welcome the campus, the Princeton campus. A number of people, 150, 200 people are joining us from the Princeton campus today. So glad that you're all here. This sermon series has been interesting. I've had interesting comments from a number of you. And I'll just say to you that one of the things that has irritated me through the years has been the sense that a lot of people have that Jesus was soft and that Christians are soft. Nice, compassionate, but soft. The truth of the matter is that Jesus was one of the toughest people who ever lived and also the most compassionate. And I think that's what we are called to be as followers of Christ. And the remarkable fact is that the toughest people I've ever known have been Christians, without a doubt. And no text gets us to that understanding, I think, better than this particular text. We're reading today from John, the 5th chapter. You'll note that most of the time when there's a healing miracle in the Gospels, Jesus comes along and he finds someone who's in trouble and he touches them or in some way heals them. This is a unique passage in the 5th chapter of John. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Beth-zatha. This is the way this particular translation reads, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool." Note that this man never really answers the question of Jesus directly. He tells a story. He says, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now, that day was a Sabbath. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was sitting out in the backyard with my older grandson, Liam. I think he was about 3 at the time. And we were enjoying, it was a day like this, we were enjoying the sunshine, the nice weather, and I looked up and an airliner was coming over. It's pretty low, you could hear it. And I looked up at that airplane and I said, "Liam, look at that airplane. Where do you suppose those people are going?" And without missing a beat, he turned to me and he said, "To the airport." It was in that moment that I understood the remarkable truth that intelligence is inherited. But the truth of the matter is, it's important to know where we're going, isn't it? It's important to have a sense of destination in life and a sense of direction in life. If you're missing that, then you're missing a lot. You're missing a lot of those kinds of important ingredients that are necessary to live life fully. I remember a number of years ago, maybe 25 or 30 years ago, we had a party at our home for the graduating seniors. We can't do that anymore. There's too many of them. But back in those days, Christ Church was much smaller, and all the graduating seniors gathered in our house. And I remember sitting in the living room, and we went around the room, and I asked all of our graduating seniors, I asked each of them to say a word about what they were planning on doing in the next several years. Some of them were going to work, most of them were going off to college. But I still remember how some of them were pretty hazy about what it is that they were going to do. And let me tell you, that's okay. At that age, that's okay. I remember when I was a graduating senior, even when I was graduating from college, I wasn't real sure what I wanted to do. But I'll never forget about how 2 or 3 of those graduating seniors had such remarkable clarity about what it is they wanted to do in life. One of them said, "I'm going to go to A&M and I'm going to major in biology and chemistry and I'm going to become a pediatric neurologist," I think it was. And she did. Another young man was a very bright mathematician, very gifted mathematician. I'll never forget what he said. He said, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get my degree, and then I'm going to make a lot of money. And he has. He's a hedge fund manager, and he has made tons of money. So we don't always have it from the very beginning, but at some point, having clarity about who you are and where you are in life and where you want to go in life, your direction in life, having clarity about that is one of the most important things for living the good and fulfilling, meaningful life. So when we turn to this story, it's interesting from the very beginning, I think, because Jesus says, do you want to be healed, to this man? He's sitting there at this pool. These running waters are rumored to have healing powers when they start getting stirred up. I guess it's some kind of a spring of some kind. And so people go there to be healed. And he's been there for 38 years. And Jesus says, do you want to be healed? It's kind of a way of saying, do you know what it is you want in life? Do you have a sense of direction in life? What are you becoming in life? And the fact that this man doesn't give a clear answer is telling, isn't it? Rather than saying yes or no, simple answer to a simple question, this man tells a story. And he says, sir, I've been here 38 years. You know what the story is. It's the story about being a victim. He says, I've been here 38 years, and I really, every time I try to get into the water, somebody beats me to it. And then by the time I get down to the waters have stopped stirring up. So for 38 years, I've been coming here and sitting here. I wonder how many times he has told that story to how many people. He has become locked into a state of passivity where all he knows to do in life is just to wait. Wait, 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 and make excuses. It happens more often than we think, and you know it. Perhaps you've been in that place at some point in life. Here's where I get kind of irritated with this kind of stereotypical understanding of Christianity. Sometimes I think we as Christians get confused that we're supposed to just wait until Jesus comes along and provides a miracle for us. I mean, I can see how people get misled in that way. You read through the Gospels and there's these stories about people standing around on the side of the road or in the midst of the city on the corner, and they're not doing anything, and Jesus comes along and they're blind or they're lame or whatever, paralyzed, and Jesus touches them and heals them. And so I think it's kind of easy for you and me to think that just being passive, being locked into a state of passivity and just waiting, that is a sign of faithfulness. That if we'll just wait long enough, Jesus is going to come along and make everything okay. There's an old country saying that says, the biggest troublemaker in your life is the one who stares you in the face every morning when you look into the mirror. And when we're honest with ourselves, we all know that's true. The biggest troublemaker in our lives, in your life or mine, it is ourselves. Last week I quoted Albert Schweitzer. I said, Schweitzer once said that there are two kinds of people in the world, those who are helpers and those who are not. Today, I want to introduce you to another way of thinking about the way in which we can divide the world, and I've mentioned this in years past. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who need to give up some control in life, chill, become a little bit more passive, and those who need to take some control in life. And you know which one you are, don't you? If you don't, if you're married, ask your spouse. He or she will tell you. And so most of you know which category I fall into on that. Those of us who need to give up some control in life, we tend to be impulsive. We tend to fire before we aim. We tend to be obsessive compulsive. We tend to overdo things. And we have to constantly be listening for God's word to us, and that word is a pretty simple one. You are not in charge, I am. And so I've preached lots of sermons for people like me and those of you that are like me, and we'll preach more sermons in the future. But today's sermon is for those who have a tendency to be more passive in life, to not take up enough control in life. And when you read the scriptures, it is clear that Jesus is a tough-minded human being who wants us to do our part in bringing the kingdom of God on earth. And so you can think about the ways in which this applies to your life, perhaps. If your marriage isn't going well, you've got two choices. You can sit around and pray about it and hope that Jesus will come along and heal your marriage. Or you can hear the words of Jesus that say, get up and do something about it. Do something about it. Go to a therapist, ask for help. If you are out of work, you can sit around feeling sorry for yourself and kind of celebrate the fact that you are a victim, or you can get up and do something about it. That doesn't negate the fact that in today's world there are lots of people who find it almost impossible to find a job, and we need to remember that. But the point is that when you read the gospel of Jesus Christ, we are not called to be passive people. We are not called to be victims. We are called to be faithful. And that means that tough-minded, compassionate Jesus encourages us to get up and walk, to get up and do our part, to get up and do something about it. And so that brings us to the second part of this passage, and I think it's really, really important. And that is, always when we meet Jesus, no matter how tough Jesus is always the encourager. You know that word, encourage, we've talked about it a lot. It comes from the Greek word courage, which means heart. It means put the heart back in. And so when we confront Jesus, tough-minded Jesus, who says, stop being locked into a state of passivity, get up and do something, we also find the one who encourages us. Tough and also the most compassionate man who ever lived. And so he turns to this man, and there's a part of me, having read about Jesus through the years, there's a part of me that thinks this man got off pretty easy because Jesus could have lit into him about his lack of action. Instead, he just looks at him with great compassion and says, look, if you want to be healed, then get up and walk. Get up and walk. When I was growing up, my father, when I was in grade school and first part of middle school, junior high and middle school, my father was the associate pastor at First Methodist Church, downtown Dallas. He worked for Robert E. Goodridge Jr. Bob Goodridge was arguably one of the greatest preachers in Methodism in the 20th century. Amazing preacher. I calculated a few years ago, I never really thought about this, but I went back when I was in seminary, in graduate school at SMU. I went down to First Church Dallas and I worked for Bob Goodridge. So my father and I both worked for him. I worked for him until he was elected a bishop. And I got to calculating the number of sermons that I had heard Bob Goodridge preach, and I realized that I heard more sermons preached by Bob Goodridge than I heard preached by my own father. And he just had this amazing way of presenting the gospel, and it was hard to figure out what it was that was so compelling about his preaching. And I remember asking a friend of mine one time, I was in my early 20s, and she was maybe 10 or 15 years older than I in her 30s, a wonderful person, a wonderful friend, and she was a huge Bob Goodridge fan. And I asked her one time, I said, Elaine, what is it about Dr. Goodridge's sermons that are so compelling? And she said, I've thought about that a lot, and the truth is, I can't answer that question exactly except to say this. Every Sunday morning when I get up to leave, I always think, yes, I can do it. Yes, I can do it. And I started paying attention to the sermons. I thought, that's exactly what he did. He made you think that you could do it. And I thought that was such a remarkable compliment for a preacher, because as I look at the gospel and I look at the story of Jesus, that's exactly what Jesus helps people do. Jesus helps people realize that they can do it, that they can be forgiven and they can do it, that they can move forward with whatever it is that God's calling them to do in life, and they can do it. Jesus, the great encourager, tough but compassionate. A number of years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, Jim Henson was still living, the Muppets. The Muppets had this great song that some of you may remember. Maybe your kids watched it. Maybe if you're young, maybe you watched it. The Muppets had this song that they would sing all the time called I Can Do It. You remember that? I Can Do It. And I was watching a television show one night, and honestly, I don't remember what it was. It may have been some kind of a documentary or some kind of celebration of the Muppets, of Jim Henson. Jim Henson was still alive, the creator of the Muppets. And at one point, they brought this man out. This man came out, and he was carrying his daughter. She was about 3 years old, and she had leg braces on. And he came out, and Jim Henson was there, and the Muppets were here. And he said, Mr. Henson, I want to tell you a story. He said, my daughter was born with a condition, a syndrome, where she could not walk. And the doctors always told us that she'll never walk. And he took her, and she's about 3 years old. He put her on the ground, and she walked across the stage. One step at a time, slowly, one step at a time. And he said, I want you to know that my daughter learned how to walk by watching the Muppets. They sang, I Can Do It every day. Every day she sang with the Muppets, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. He said, because of you, my daughter can walk. I wonder how many Christians could say the same thing about Jesus. Tough-minded Jesus, but compassionate Jesus. The one who comes to us in our most discouraging and desperate moments and encourages us by saying, get up and walk. Get up and walk. You can do it.